Hey, it's Mel from Rap Rankings. To hear the full episode this clip comes from and all of the other episodes, check the link in the description, stop by raprankings.com, or search Rap Rankings on your favorite podcast platform. And please consider liking, subscribing, and commenting to help us grow the channel and continue our journey as hip-hop's first and premier extreme podcast.
So our next guest needs no introduction. He is a music journalist, historian, lecturer, independent A&R consultant, and quite frankly, a Boston legend. His new book, Best Damn Hip Hop Writing, The Book of Dart, is available now on Amazon.com and many other fine retailers. Ladies and gentlemen, Rap Rankings Universe, please welcome the man, the myth, the legend, Dart Adams.
Hey, what up?
Hey, Dart, thank you for joining us, and we're here to discuss track 7, As the Rhyme Goes On, off of Paid in Full.
Yep.
So what we do on the guest spots here typically is we'll bring someone in. We're going to have Mel briefly explain the rating system, and then we can talk about As the Rhyme Goes On and where it stands for us in our own ratings.
Okay,
so basically, it's a simple system. It works on a scale of 1 to 10, with each number meaning something. So basically, 10 means it's a perfect song to you, one of your favorite songs of all time. 9 means you love it. 8 means you like it a lot. 7 means you like it. 6 means it's all right. You don't dislike it, but you can't say that you like it. 5 means you feel practically nothing about it. 4 means it's not the worst thing you've ever heard, but you dislike it. 3 means you dislike it. 2 means you hate it. And 1 means you absolutely can't stand it. One of the worst things you've ever heard. So that's pretty much it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can lead off if you like, with that knowledge in mind. What would you rate the song?
All right. So first off, I need to explain a bunch of things about the particular song and its space and it occupies on the album, right? Now, as we all know, Paid in Full is considered a classic, seminal hip hop album, right?
Absolutely.
The thing about it is there's 10 songs on this album. And the cassette, most of us had the cassette, or we had the vinyl. Now, the thing about the album we have to keep in mind is that while there are 10 songs, there are really 7 songs on the album, in a sense. Right. Eric B's on the cut is an instrumental. Mm-hmm. Chinese Arithmetic, instrumental. These are both scratch records. Mm-hmm. And 10 is an extended beat, which fills out the album, but isn't necessarily a song. So that means that we're down to 7 tracks, right?
Right.
I Ain't No Joke is a single. My Melody, a single. I Know You Got Soul is a single. Move the Crowd is a single. Paid in Full is a single. Eric B. is President, single. What song on this album is essentially the lone album track?
As the Rhyme Goes On.
As the Rhyme Goes On. As the Rhyme Goes On, in the time span that I remember the album coming out in July 1987, it came out the same day as Rhyme Pays by Ice-T. I don't remember there being a single or vinyl. If you go on Discogs, you'll find a UK release with it on it, but it was not a single in 87 or 88, per my recollection. With 4th and Broadway, their special colored vinyl that we used to get. So the one song on the album that was the album track, kind of like if you're familiar with Janet Jackson's Control, there were 2 songs. There were 2 songs on Control that were just the album tracks. Everything else was a single. Right. So As the Rhyme Goes On is super important, especially for the sequencing of this album. Right. It comes after Paid in Full and before Chinese Arithmetic. You don't tolerate Chinese Arithmetic without hearing As the Rhyme Goes On before it.
Right.
And you need a strong song to follow Move the Crowd and Paid in Full. And the big important thing is you have to remember is that we're talking about sides A and side B. So both sides have to be even, right? They have to be balanced. So after you heard the first side of Paid in Full, you flip it over. You got Paid in Full, As the Rhyme Goes On, Chinese Arithmetic, Eric B is President, and you finish with the extended beat. So As the Rhyme Goes On is kind of the tether, it's kind of the anchor, and it's just holding everything together. It's crucial in its placement.
Right.
Interesting, because Dart, you know, out of all the songs on this album, I was shocked when you said to me, As the Rhyme Goes On is the song you wanted to join us for. Surely there are other songs on this album with much more history. And as a historian, you know, I'm thinking, okay, where's he going to go with this? Now I see.
Yeah.
Because this is an important record in the sense of, as you said, kind of building up goodwill for Chinese arithmetic.
Let's put it this way. Without As the Rhyme Goes On, being as dope as it is, and the space it occupies, where it is, this is not considered one of the all-time great rap albums.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Because, okay, we have to think about this, right? The album comes out July 1987. Summer 86 is when we hear Eric B is President and My Melody on Zakia, before they have the deal, 4th and Broadway deal. They're on Zakia, and it's Eric B featuring Rakim.
Right.
The first time I saw a picture of Eric B and Rakim, I'm looking at the picture and I'm thinking Rakim is Eric B and the little guy's the DJ. Okay, so that gives you an idea how like little we understood about what was going on, right? Before there were videos and coverage was. But the song, Eric B is President and Move the Crowd, you know, like completely took over the imaginations of everybody who heard it. You know, people lost their minds when these records came out, but there was nobody rapping like Rakim at the time. So when we're coming up to the album, you know, you have the singles drop. I Ain't No Joke was had a video. You finally get to see, you know, Rakim. And then Paid in Full has a video too. It has a special remix, you know, that takes off overseas in London and the UK. And like they become a global phenomenon. And the sampling becomes a hot button issue later. But As the Rhyme Goes On is a incredible, solid song in terms of structure, in terms of like the flow, Rakim's flow, dropping the beat in and out.
Yeah.
The cadence, the style. And people used to say that like Rakim only raps one way, right? He has this one style, which is trash because he's super versatile, you know. When you go through Eric B and Rakim's back catalog, and you listen to the songs, you understand exactly how versatile and how many different flows Rakim has and how effortless it seems. So it all sounds like he's doing the same thing over and over again, right? Mm-hmm. But As the Rhyme Goes On is really like, it's like a document to like how incredible of a lyricist and MC he is, because he keeps us going the whole entire time. You like the second and third listen when I was a kid is when I finally realized all the things that happened with the beat, the song dropping out, the beat changing, all these extra elements, because I was so focused on what he was saying. Like that's a mark of a great song. And it's so great that people overlook it because I Ain't No Jokes on the same album. My Melody's on the same album. I know You Got Souls on the same album. Move the Crowds on the same album. So in order to like hold place and hold serve on an album like this, the song has to be great. Nobody has ever said, I skip As the Rhyme Goes On, because nobody's skipping As the Rhyme Goes On to get to Chinese arithmetic.
Right.
That's 100% true.
Right. Good point.
You know, to your point, Dart, you were saying like people are out here saying Rakim only has one flow. That's whack.
Yeah,
that's literally insane to me, because on this very song, you know, of course, most people are going to be familiar if they go and listen to this record and they've never heard it before. You're going to hear Rakim say, I'm the R, the A to the K I am. And if I wasn't, why would I say I am?
Exactly. He has several notable lines in this song. And it's funny because when people quote it, I'm like, did people even realize what song they're quoting? Like, there's so many parts of this song where you're just like, wow, this
The
dude is
album
out of
in
here.
general. I mean, this album, as I'm listening back a bunch of times in preparation for this episode, it's honestly staggering how influential this album is. This song, even, you know, you could say this is not a single, but at the you know, you hear even that line when, you know, the line that Eminem interpolated for "The Way I Am," and
Mhm.
it's not just that line; it's how he goes into that line. He
Yes.
breaks the flow previously to change the cadence and the delivery completely when he transitions into this line. So to say he only has one flow, he's exhibiting multiple flows on this very song. And not to mention, you know, this is something that Rakim said about this album in general, was that these were the beats that he used to rock just out in the park freestyling. These are the beats. These are the rhymes. And to me, this is a song that, you know, there's no hook on here. It's straight rhyming the whole way
Yes.
through. So this is, to me, quintessential MCing. This is the foundation. This is the seed. This is the stump of the tree that grows into every other branch in hip hop. This song, this album, I give this song an 8.
So the insane part about this is that when you think about it, right, between 1986 and 1988 are the albums that changed the what rap became going forward, because these were the influential albums that everybody elaborated on and took and said, all right, this is what we're going to start from, and everything we grow from here. And basically, like, Rakim laid it out. And the thing is that he didn't make an album before this. You know, before he became an MC, he was trying to play football. You know, his
Right.
family was full of musicians and things like that. But he had to tell his family, he's like, yeah, I'm gonna do this music thing, and, you know, just see what happens if it works out. Not realizing that he was on the cusp of becoming one of the all-time greats and part of the next triumvirate of great MCs. And the crazier part of that is that when you think about the triumvirate of great MCs that sparked everything, we usually credit Rakim, we usually credit
Big Daddy Kane, right?
Big Daddy Kane and Cool G Rap. In order,
Yep.
it's Rakim, Cool G Rap. Both came out in '86. Big Daddy Kane's first single in '87. But we usually leave out KRS-One, who started everything out off to in 1986. So that's crazy in of itself. But you think of this album, you think of Criminal Minded, you know, you think of the first Cool G Rap and DJ Polo album, Road to the Riches, and then you think of Big Daddy Kane's first album, Long Live the Kane. That basically encompassed everything that people elaborated on going forward.
Right. Totally formative to the genre and advancing flows and delivery and the way that rap is going to go from just that A-B pattern of rhyming to a more stylistic, advanced, and you know, quite frankly, like vicious style. I mean, Rakim on this album, to this day, you know, this album only came out 3 months after I was born. So this album's damn near as old as I am. And it still sounds fresh. This album sounds fresh in 2020. This shit still could get a party going. I'm telling you, I'm not even trying to be funny. There are songs on this record that are 100% timeless, Smithsonian. Just like, get it. Come on. This is where it all started, man. For real. For me, and for all the stuff that everyone in my generation is influenced by, they owe this album a debt of gratitude. And this song, for being a song that wasn't a single, an album cut, I mean, I really like this song. It's the first time, I think, Dart, correct me if I'm wrong, that this Barry White bass line is employed.
In this manner, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because
we got the Beastie Boys on here, the Pump It Up, Homeboy.
Yeah. So the crazy thing is that song construction in like rap as we know it, sampling was fairly new and people were experimenting and doing new things with it. And they were like, oh, you can do that. And then they were elaborating on it. So when you go back and listen to this album, which was released again in July '87, some of this was made between 86 and 87, and a lot of stuff was thought up and conceived in 86, but you had to find a studio, and then you had to find engineers, and then you had to find the right people to get your ideas together, because the rap was in that type of experimental stage where people still using reel to reel, you know, and splicing everything together and having pastiches of sound. So when you listen to this album and hear how incredible it sounds, it's not like 88 and 89 when you had the drum machine or the setup where you could just like make the beat on the fly and it sounds completely different because you're using brand new technology. Like, you have to think about what was the equipment used to make this. SP12, certain things in the studio. You had limitations based on who was in the studio. You know, Herb Powers, of course, mastered it, but you had Marley Marl, who was brought in by Eric B. Because Eric B, of course, had connections working at the radio station, and he was going around looking for people. You know, Patrick Adams engineered it, but like for the most part, you're thinking about like what studio did they work in? You know, who is overseeing the project? You're on 4th and Broadway, which didn't have a whole bunch of rap on the label. You know, they moved from Zakia. And like you just like, and on Paid in Full, they break down everybody who they worked with. Cara Lewis was their agent. Cara Lewis went on to become a super agent later on with a well-known, you know, talent agency, William Morris, I believe. But now she's huge. But she was representing rappers coming out of the Rush stable. You know, they're rolling with Rush Artist Management, Rush Town, which at the time was headed by, you know, Russell Simmons, who gave it to Andre Harrell, rest in peace. And he had this young white kid, you know, running around with him called Leor Cohen, you know, in tracksuits, you know. Yep. And then like they had the people that they did the tours with. They had this infamous guy that they did tours with coming out of the Fresh Fest era, 85, 86. But again, this album, if you resequence this album, it doesn't hit the same. If you try to recreate side A and side B, the album doesn't hit the same. And you need to put those 3 instrumentals in a special place so that it doesn't mess up the flow of the album. So you have to figure out where you're going to put Eric B's on the cut. You have to figure out where you're going to put Chinese Arithmetic, and you're going to have to figure out what you do with the extended beat. The extended beat was always going to be last.
Okay, I need to ask you something then, because you just contextualize this record in this album perfectly. To me, my issue with Eric B on the cut has never been that I don't like the record. I think it comes too soon after I Ain't No Joke, which is such an up-tempo like way to set off this album. I almost wish My Melody and Eric B on the cut were flipped. I want you to explain why Eric B on the cut is crucial at number 2.
Okay, so here's the thing. We could sequence this album in several different ways. All right, so I have several theories, right? There are classic albums that are classic despite how they're sequenced. There are classic albums that are classic albums largely due to their sequencing. Janet Jackson's Control, perfectly sequenced album. Anita Baker's Rapture, perfectly sequenced album. 2 albums that are classics that could have been sequenced 2 completely different ways on the flip side in pop. They are No Jacket Required by Phil Collins and Songs from the Big Chair by Tears for Fears, right? These albums could have been sequenced completely differently, hit harder, but they're still classics. This album falls in line with that. Eric B is on the cut doesn't need to be number 2.
Okay.
You could put I Ain't No Joke first, My Melody second, Eric B is on the cut third, and you could put I Know You Got Soul fourth, Move the Crowd fifth, right?
Right.
But
that's
then,
what I was thinking.
Yeah, but then on B-side, you could put As the Rhyme Goes On 6th, Paid in Full 7th, Chinese Arithmetic still at 8th, and then have Eric B as president after it, or end with the extended beat, or you could flip it within that time frame. But the thing is that it always comes down to where as the rhyme goes on goes, because it's either behind paid in full or it's leading into paid in full. But the idea is that we start the album off with "I Ain't No Joke," which is the single that everybody knows, and you want to start out side B with the song everybody knows. So that's why it's like that. Now, that's thinking that we have to keep something over from the songs everybody recognizes because we're trying to sell this album. Mm-hmm. And at the time, rap wasn't as big as it later became. Like, the big albums at the time was like maybe LL Cool J's Radio, pick a Run DMC album, pick a Houdini album, pick a Fat Boys album. But the thing is that this album had to exude something completely different than the 84, 85 era of rap. They couldn't think about what worked for Curtis Blow, what worked for the Fat Boys, what worked for Run DMC, because Rakim is not like any of those groups, not like any of those artists. Rakim is not like a Houdini. Rakim's album is not going to feel like a Houdini album. This is something new. 86, 87 going forward. Like maybe Criminal Minded might have been a better thing. If you look at the lineup, like how Criminal Minded is sequenced, but Rakim's flow and rhymes and the way it hit and his voice hit was different, because even though it's Eric B and Rakim, everybody came to the album for Rakim. Rakim is the one that drew everybody in.
Yeah.
With Criminal Minded, with BDP, it was KRS-One and Scott LaRock. You know what I'm saying? Like, so they were a unit.
They looked at Boogie Down Productions. It wasn't KRS-One until Scott LaRock passed away.
Exactly.
And, after a while, KRS dropped the Boogie Down Productions. But, it took a while for people to refer to KRS as KRS. Mm-hmm. When people got that tape, Criminal Minded, that was BDP. That's it.
Yes. So, and also, we have to think about the way the group was viewed, right? When we think of Eric B and Rakim, yes, we know it's Eric B and Rakim, but the focus is Rakim. When we think of a group like Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, the focus wasn't Fresh Prince. The focus was Jazzy Jeff. Pretty much, Fresh Prince was just there to frame what Jeff was doing. And he was clever enough, and he was just past corny enough, and he could carry the songs enough, and he had his influence, you know what I'm saying? Like, he had his draw. Like, live, he was great live. Like, if you listen to the live joints he did with Ready Roxy or Live at Union Square, that's where he really shined, and then he was funny.
Well, yeah, and that invites you to suburban America quickly.
Yes, but the thing is that the guy was Jazzy Jeff. Mm-hmm. That's why his name's first. It was Cool G Rap and DJ Polo. That's when the dynamic switches. Nobody cared about Polo. We just didn't. We didn't listen to the album for Polo, just like we didn't listen to Eric B and Rakim albums for Eric B. That's why Eric B had to make it a point to have scratch songs on there, because everybody's coming for Rakim. I got to get my thing off.
Right. He's not trying to get buried. But at the same token, it's Eric B who's trying to convince Rakim to come and record. So as you said earlier, it was originally Eric B featuring Rakim before we got Eric B and Rakim, while Rakim's at Stony Brook University.
Mm-hmm. Playing football.
Right. So, but it's interesting how that dynamic, though, it's Eric B and Rakim, but you're absolutely right. I've always just seen, it's Eric B, but forget about him. It's all about Rakim to me.
Yeah, but Eric B was the guy in hip-hop.
Yeah.
Everybody knew Eric B. He was the dude with the connections. I mean, Eric B got Marley Marl and MC Shan into the session to engineer and help produce for the Zakiya singles. All right? So he had pull. He was the guy with the juice. Before was Rakim was supposed to be Freddie Fox.
Okay.
Yeah. So like everybody knew Eric B. So he was the draw. He was the guy in hip hop. But when I was 11, I was 10 going on 11 when I first heard Eric B. as president. And and that first came on the radio, check out my melody. And then I was 11 going on 12 when I heard, I ain't no joke, I know you got soul and everything else.
What does that feel like? Because, like, as I said, I was 3 months old when this album came out. I had not, had any awareness of the world around me at this point. You're old enough now to get into music and stuff like that. You've been listening to rap, and then this comes along. What is this like for you?
All right, so my earliest memories of rap are late 1978. Cassettes from New York, clashes, battles from PALs and park jams and stuff like that. The first time I hear rap on a record is spring 1979. And that's King Tim III by Fatback Band. And I'm like, what? Wait, they doing this on records now? So you have to think about the progression that I grew up with, where the first three great MCs, and there was one guy on the outside, the first three great MCs are Grandmaster Melly Mel of the Grandmaster Flash and the three MCs, then Grandmaster Flash and the four MCs, and Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. Then the next guy is Grandmaster Caz. And the third guy is Kool Moe Dee of Treacherous 3. But the guy on the outside was Spoonie G. And then right below him was Curtis Blow. So those were the guys, right? Now think of how those guys rhymed. And those guys were the guys from like 1979 on until like 1983. Then we hit 84. 83, 84, now it's a Run DMC world. Now it's a Houdini world. Now it's the world of the Disco 3 / Fat Boys, So the game is completely different. We had Crash Crew and all the mothers in the past, right? But the rap is different. It's changing. And into 85, 86. Once we get to 86, it's like a whole new different era where we're sending all the old guys off on ice flows, down the river, because rap has completely changed. The cadence, the flow, the style. Even though like there are some old school MCs from 79, 80 who could still hang, some sound super dated. Curtis Blow did not work past 86. You heard Curtis Blow on the record past 86, you were just like, why is he here? And that was because of guys like Rakim and Cool G Rap, and then later and KRS-One, and later Big Daddy Kane, And, T La Rock still sounded fresh, but T La Rock was around from like 83, 84, and he was able to carry over because he had kind of the same style that Kool Moe Dee had. Grandmaster Caz hang around. Spoonie G hang around for a little while longer, like into 87, 88. But for the most part, a lot of guys were done. So when you're a kid and you're experiencing different waves of MCing, you recognize immediately, all right, this is the new wave, this is the new style. And a lot of the guys that I liked in previous years, they're over, they're done. And I experienced that twice already by the age of 10. So to give you an idea.
But I would say, this was probably, even still to this day, the most drastic shift ever, from something that's very raw, elemental, simple, great, but simple, to something that's really advanced, and we're getting into subject matter that, this is a total expansion and a total leap. Probably the biggest leap, honestly, because as a listener who was not there during this time, there's such a noticeable shift when I'm going back and studying these records and I hear something like Rakim, and it sounds like revelatory even within that context, when you keep in mind this is what came before. And this is new. This is, as you're starting in the late 70s and making your way through the early 80s into the late 80s, and, we hit 87 and this album comes out, it feels like a total sea change in the genre. in
Yeah.
just everything in the construction of how to make these songs.
Yeah, but like around 86, it was a shift that started, you know?
Mhm.
So like we knew that, oh, okay, it's not gonna be like it was in the past. When we heard BDP, we're like, okay, yeah, things are different now. You know, when we heard Just Ice, we're like, okay, yeah, this is a new direction that we're headed in. The first time we hear Cool G rap, you know, this is a demo. We know, all right, we're headed somewhere different now. So it was a progressive shift where we're starting to hear like new MCs and like hear the new albums in 86 going into 87. So by the time the album comes out, we'd already shifted over. You know, we're ready for
Right.
ultramagnetic
You're
MCs.
100% prime for all of
Yeah.
this now.
Yeah, we're ready for ultramagnetic MCs. But like we know that guys like the Skinny Boys who are on top of the world just 12, 18 months before, they're going to have to change something if they're going to still be around and on top in 88. You know, like that's where we noticed the difference. To give you an example, I hate doing this, but I'm going to have to go back to Janet Jackson's Control. When Janet Jackson dropped Control in 1986, a similar thing happened in black music, R&B, pop going forward. Everybody was like, yeah, we gonna have to do something different. We can't keep doing what we were doing before because this shit is gonna end all of our careers. You know? And what happened is people adapted and groups adapted and the production changed and the way people presented the music changed going forward. And everybody knew we can't keep doing what we did before, otherwise we might as well just get out the pool. And that's what these albums did. Like, and also I have to remind everybody, this album came out the same day as Ice-T's Rhyme Pays. So when you think about this album, think about me, a young me, 11 going on 12-year-old me, listening to this album and Ice-T's Rhyme Pays at the same time. Being like, oh shit. So, like, just to give you an idea to frame everything. And again, albums did not come out anywhere near as frequently as they do now. A rap album came out and it was like, oh, it's the new rap album. By the 90s, you had to save up your money and pick which album you were going to buy.
Right.
In the late 80s, it was like, all right, these are the albums. I always say this. 1986 was the first year you could write about the top 10 rap albums of the year. 1987 was the first year you could write about the top 10 rap albums of the year and argue about what the top 10 rap albums of the year was. 1988 is the first year you could list the top 20 rap albums of the year and argue about what the top 20 rap albums of the year was. Then after that, it was
we're off to the races. It's there's just too much. And you know, to this day though, this album really, I feel like it totally stands the test of time. And I think Mel and I are proof of two people that did not grow up when this came out and, you know, have an appreciation for it regardless. I mean, if you love hip hop and you're really a student of the game and you throughout the years, you've enjoyed rap and maybe you haven't heard this album, go back and you would be surprised at how many of the words you already know because your favorite rapper has said at least a few bars off Rakim. So, you know, to say that he's maybe the most influential MC to other MCs is not a stretch whatsoever. And I like this song as the rhyme goes on. I give it an 8. Dart, what do you give the song?
I give it a 10 because it follows Paid in Full and makes us tolerate Chinese arithmetic, which could have sunk the entire B-side of this album.
Okay.
Because again, Chinese Arithmetic is not a great scratch song.
Okay. Well, I'll say I just want to start here. You definitely help recontextualize this record for me because something that I hadn't considered when listening to this album, in preparation for this review, this was my first time ever hearing this album. Not my first time hearing a lot of these songs because growing up, you know, my dad played a lot of them around me. I was familiar with Rakim and Eric B. I was familiar with a lot of the singles, but this is my first time listening front to back.
Mhm.
I hadn't considered, like you were saying, side A, side B. At the time, that's how records were distributed. That's how they were presented. You had like vinyl, you had a side A and a side B. So it was even more of a strategic decision as far as sequencing and where to place things.
Exactly.
And, when I was reading about the album, something stood out. Rakim said they put Eric B as president, towards the end of the album because it had been out, I guess, for like a year at that point.
Yes.
And it was a single. So it made sense to keep it deeper in the album. But this, as far as you were saying, kind of like the glue tying it together, like Chinese arithmetic, which I'll admit, I'll shamelessly admit is something I actually enjoy. But I agree, it could have completely disrupted the flow of everything and sunk the album had it been positioned in the wrong slot. So this being here, thinking about it in that sense is kind of changing things for me. I also like the record. I gave it a 7 plus, which is like a strong 7. I was basically like you were saying early on, Mools, of course, my first introduction, I hear in the song, I'm the R to the A, or I'm the R, the A to the K I am. If I wasn't there, why would I say I am? Of course, I'm 27 years old. So my introduction to this is through Eminem. And I had no idea until hearing this record that was borrowed from Rakim. So I'm like, there's another one. Like I just add a tally mark because I've just throughout the years have noticed so many things have been recycled from Rakim, and this was like another one. And I was shocked to hear that. But, this is a song that's basically at its core, Rakim expressing his love affair with rhyming and writing. And I'm here for all of it because, I started writing and rapping in 2007. And honestly, hearing him talk about rap reminds me of how I was. It takes me back to then, when I started. And I think it's a testament to how clearly if it was able to, elicit the same sort of response in a young man 20 years after the fact, like after this came out, clearly there's something foundational about this that is long lasting and has longevity. You were saying, if I feel like to a degree, if you don't appreciate this album, you might think you like hip hop, but you actually don't, because it's like the fact that we're in 2020, this album is 33 years old now. And still, I'm enjoying this, amidst, you got this sing-songy melodic rap and you got trap and hi-hats over here and this over there. And this still sounds fresh. This still sounds like music that I genuinely want to hear, I think says a lot. And it definitely still holds up. You were saying earlier, Dart, like you listen like a few times and it wasn't until a few listens in that you notice all that was happening with the beat,
Yeah.
And me growing up, so like I was kind of accustomed to like beat drops and different stylistic flourishes. So like I noticed, and it was one of my favorite moments in the song where Rakim is saying, even if I stop, and the beat drops out.
Yep.
It's like the rhyme remains to be. And I was like, oh, that was fresh. But like I'm kind of accustomed to picking up on that stuff because that was more commonplace by the time I started listening, to rap. So it's interesting to hear that like at the time that was kind of a newer sort of thing, I think that's great. You added a lot of great historical context to this record for me. And yeah, I can't express how many times I've heard this like Barry White sample used. And I was reading, of course, about the album too. I guess this was kind of the start of people messing around with James Brown a lot. According to Rakim, like after this album, a lot of MCs started, a lot of producers started digging
James
through
Brown
the James
is
Brown
like
crate, and
probably one of the most, if not the most, sampled artists in a producer's arsenal at this point, right?
Right.
Yeah. There were staple breaks that people used coming off of the old Winley records. Winley is a record label, and they had the first like sample / break series, and then later on you had like the ones that came afterwards, Ultimate Beats and Breaks, what have you. Simon Harris did the sounds and records, stuff like that. But for the most part, you had Nubian Crackers, all those different guys. But Slammin' Records did all those. But for the most part, the records and the staples that people sampled came from the old days of hip hop, back when people used to just spin breaks for the B-boys. But during this time, there were brand new standards brought in that people started sampling and using and flipping that didn't come from the sample/sound records. So this was the beginning of people like, yo, did you hear? What is that? You know? And then they realized that, oh, that's Barry White. My mom has that record.
Right.
You know? So they're like, what else does Barry White have going forward? And again, something I have to stress. Samples were not listed in the album credits or in the liner notes in 1987. So it was a mad hunt to try to figure out what was being used on these records. Fonda Ray's Over Like a Fat Rat. Some kids of some era never heard that song, and
Right.
some kids heard it their whole lives at the party or at the cookout, and some kids heard it old enough to hear it on the radio. So they're like, I know that.
That bass line when it comes in,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, that's from somewhere.
Yeah,
Right.
I know what that is. So we had different generations of rap fans in the listening audience.
Right.
Right, because
Yeah.
to me, when I hear that sample, the first thing I thought of initially was like, oh yeah, that's the Nas sample, right? But there's so many that came before and so many after, but this is the first time, as Dart said, it was employed in this way. And quite frankly, the way that it is employed in this song, it's done more tastefully than it is on most other songs. Most other songs seem to do a very, very straight up take, but louder, and this seems like they did something with the sample is just kind of keep it down in the bass line. Like, it's not too heavy up in the front, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but the crazy thing about that is this is due to the limitations of sampling equipment.
The hardware limitations at this time.
Yeah, so a lot of the samples, the sounds, the drops, the minimalist sound, you know, is because of the limitations. Like, it was probably cut and spliced and put on a reel.
Right.
As opposed to, you know, the way we can put together compositions now and beat making. Like, you listen to this album and you're like, all right, this album was released in 87, but it was made partly in 86 and then in early 87 before it was turned in, right? Now, think about the albums that you hear in 88 and 89 and how advanced they are for that time and how long they were cooking and what they heard from this album. Or like a perfect example is like 1988, right? You listen to Stetsasonics In Full Gear, which is released right around the same time as Public Enemy's It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. But then the album that was made around the same time but dropped after them is Ultramagnetic MC's Critical Beatdown. Critical Beatdown is released months after these two albums, but it sounds like it was made for the next year. But all these albums were made around the same time, and these guys knew each other, and they reference each other, and they tour together. So when 89 comes around, everybody's looking at each other like, all right, now what are we going to do to knock them out the box? What are we going to do to knock them out the box? So Public Enemy and the Bomb Squad's going to the studio like, we can't be showed up by Daddy-O and DBC and Prince Paul again. And Prince Paul's like, ain't no way that Ultra is going to make us look like we're old again.
Yeah.
So you have to keep that in mind. That competition.
89, right? 3 Feet High and Rising. You got Prince Paul completely taking the sample game to another level.
Because of how he was always overruled in Stetsasonic. He was the low man on the totem pole in Stetsasonic. It came down to Daddy-O, DBC, you know, Delight and those guys were like the people. Wise were the guys. And he was at the bottom of the totem pole. So he had all these ideas and all these things he wanted to do, but, you know, ultimately he couldn't do it in Stetsasonic. And the crazy thing is that Daddy-O's the guy who heard what he did with De La Soul and was like, yo, you guys need to hear this. And he brought it to Tommy Boy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, like in addition to the new methods of sampling and sort of the new standards that people were sampling. You mentioned Patrick Adams earlier. Rakim was saying that like with the drum programming on this album, Patrick was actually the guy who introduced him to like the 808.
Yeah.
And Rakim was saying he would bring his break beats in and ideas, and he'd sample them up, and then this 808 was thrown on top. So it's like that was like, I guess you were getting these sort of new samples and these new standards mixed with like these new ways of production that didn't exist in like the late in the late 70s. And I think that's interesting how that came together.
I mean, the engineer in the early to mid 80s was crucial, because now everybody has equipment. Everybody has access to software where they can make music, if they make music, not just like the lay person. Why would you have beat making software if you don't do that? But if you wanted to make rap, it was alchemy. We didn't know. We knew, maybe some people knew the name of a piece of equipment, didn't know how to use it. They might have known what records they wanted to use. They might have had ideas. They didn't have studios, so they had to save up for studio time.
Right.
And then they brought records and ideas into the studio, and they're like, does anybody know how to make rap? So the engineer was crucial, because there was always some guy in the studio who was like, yeah, I actually know how to make a rap record. And they're like, okay, so we want to sample this. And then they're sitting there watching the guy, turn water into wine in the studio. Because they, like, when EPMD made their first records, they knew what they wanted to do, but they didn't know how to do it. They'd never been in the studio before, Kwame knew what he wanted to do, but he didn't know how to do it.
I grew up in Long Island, and down the street from me is where Public Enemy recorded some of It Takes a Nation of Millions. And the guy that they went to, Sabella Studios, he was a rock engineer.
Yeah.
A lot of these guys, we didn't have dedicated, quote, hip-hop engineers until the 90s.
Yeah, absolutely not. And a lot of the guys that were working as engineers were also, multi-instrumentalists. Some of them played guitar, played bass, worked in rock. So they had that kind of background. And again, the thing that people forget is that a producer in rap / hip hop is not the same as a producer in rock. They don't have this. They don't have the same set of what's the word I'm looking for?
Like
responsibilities, duties, and responsibilities. You could be a producer in rock and not necessarily touch the board. Whereas if you were a producer in rap, people felt you had to do certain things. I think that's changed going into the 90s and the zeros, because people understand more that the songwriting and the album process isn't as different as they like to think it is. But back in the days, there are a lot of people that had production credits when really it was the engineer that had to do everything, because they didn't know what the hell they were doing. But after a while and being in the studio and figuring things out, now they've really fleshed and become into the producer that, they were on later albums. And a lot of it had to do with being in the studio, learning the board, learning different things from the engineers who laid out everything for them.
And see, that's like hilarious to me, because it was never lost on me. Like, I started making beats in 2007, and it was never lost on me like how easy my generation had it. Because if I wanted to learn, like you said, it was like alchemy back then. If I wanted to learn, all I had to do was pirate some software and go on YouTube and watch a few tutorials, and I could probably make just like a decent sounding beat out of some loops and, some templates, which is, I would say, for better or worse, has changed the sound of hip hop, to where so many people are just let in the door because it doesn't take much. The barrier of entry has been reduced, but it's also allowing talents we never would have heard, in the door. So it's like, it's kind of like we've gotten a lot of low effort, low quality stuff as a result of that barrier of entry being reduced. But we've also gotten access to some people who probably back in the 80s wouldn't have known the first place to turn to.
No, absolutely
to
not.
get a rap record off the ground.
Right. And you got to think, for as good as some of these rappers from the 80s were, there may be some rappers that were on the level of a KRS-One or a Rakim that we just never heard because they never had the proper, support and outlet and like funding and, they didn't have an Eric B who had the studio down the block from his crib,
I mean, you have to think that, and this is insane, right? You have to think that how crazy it is that back in these days, there was the guy with the SB12.
Right.
The guy that everybody went to.
Right, the singular guy.
The singular guy who had the SB12, right? Now, this is 86, 87. The first time I saw SB1200 and an S950 used for sampling was in a mini documentary about sampling, and it was done by a member of De La Soul. That's the first time I ever saw a record sampled in front of my eyes. And I was like, oh my God, that's how it's done? It's 1989. I've been listening to rap since 78, 79. Okay? I've been a consumer of rap since 1979. And 10 years in, when I'm 13 going on 14, is when I finally see something get produced. And in 1990, that's when people start talking. That's when like the 88, 89, 90 is when the debate over is sampling stealing. Is it theft? Is rap even really music? What's happening, right? But also during that era, that's when we're at the tail end of the golden era. This is when songs start crossing over. This is when we got the Me, Myself, and I's. This is when we got the Funky Cold Medinas. This is when we got the Bust the Moves. Then we got the Can't Touch This. And then ultimately the thing that broke the camel's back, Ice Ice Baby, which becomes the number one single on the Billboard Hot 100. And we can't turn back anymore.
Oh
man, yeah.
Yep. That's when, inevitably something pure, the corporations start getting their hands in it.
And it gets commercialized, and, just by nature, it can't be what it was anymore.
Yeah. I mean, but there were songs that crossed over before Ice Ice Baby, but they never had a shot of going number one because they never got the support. Either black radio didn't support it enough, or white pop top 40 radio wasn't going to play it enough for it to occupy the number one space. Vanilla Ice was able to do that. And it should have been MC Hammer. But of course, MC Hammer's label didn't release You Can't Touch This in enough formats for that to happen. So it's crazy how history works.
Well, and it's also crazy how numbers are sometimes dictated by how much a label is actually willing to, put in for an artist and support the artist on the label. Because, sometimes they could call, a lot of artists get lumped in certain category. Oh, they're not high performing artists on the charts. They're a flop, this and that. They toss up a brick, whatever. But, the fact of the matter is a lot of times it's down to how much is the label going to invest in the marketing and the promotion of this record?
Yes.
How many copies are getting shipped to begin with? Yeah.
So the insane part with MC Hammer too, while we're talking about MC Hammer, while we're talking about Rakim, it's hilarious. But the thing about that was also that I was told recently, I didn't know this because I've been doing research, is that it also had to do with Capitol wanting people to buy the album as opposed to the single, because they'd seen a lot of times where people bought the single and didn't buy the album. So they reduced the amount of singles they press, so they entice people to want to buy the album instead, and the album ends up going diamond, but the single doesn't reach number one on the Billboard charts, which nobody realizes was the thing that they should have been aiming for. You needed to have someone you need to have MC Hammer rather than Vanilla Ice hit number one first on the Billboard Hot 100 on the Billboard 100. That would have changed dramatically the culture going forward.
Wow. I, it's crazy to me to think, like, knowing how big You Can't Touch This is, like, now, you know, it's like to think that they weren't pushing this seems preposterous now, but like at the time, I guess, right, you were saying, it never ceases to amaze me how labels operate and their thinking and rationale behind certain decisions. Like I understand, I guess, sort of like stifling the amount of single releases and formats because you're trying to drive people towards the album. But it's like you were saying, like what that would have meant for the culture going forward had it been MC Hammer instead of Vanilla Ice is like, that's just wow.
Because think about it, the first two songs, rap songs, that hit number one on the Billboard 100 were Vanilla Ice, Ice Ice Baby, and I believe the second one was Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, Good Vibrations.
Yeah.
So think about that. Think about that. Like, think about how Funky Cold Medina didn't hit number one. How is that possible? Think about how Wild Thing somehow didn't hit number one.
Right.
Think about how close Bust a Move got to hitting number one and didn't make it. But the songs that do because they have pop radio and top 40 support, which have more stations and more ads, which can push that song over the top.
Yeah. And, you know, like it was sort of a situation where, of course, Snatch, it's unavoidable. I mean, it's obvious. It's easier for them to sell this with a white face. You know,
absolutely.
So it's like, and you got white kids lining up out front of the stores talking about,
I'd buy it.
You'd buy it?
I'd buy it.
Okay.
I'd stand in line to go buy the motherfucker.
Which they wouldn't have done.
Yeah. I mean, no, but the thing is that white kids were standing in line to buy Two Live Crew. They were standing in line to buy NWA. They were standing in line to buy De La Soul. You know,
right.
But
Not
it's
to
just
mention
that
they were standing in line to buy Run DMC because they crossed over early on with that Aerosmith record.
Yes, yeah, right. Exactly. But it's just a matter of, if you go back and look, why didn't Walk This Way become the first rap number one on the Billboard charts?
That's the craziest thing to me. Like going back and actually looking at the numbers, I was shocked because I thought it did.
Yeah. So I've done a lot of research with this, and I've tried to figure out why this didn't happen. Why? And I was thinking about making it into a book or a project, but, I got sidetracked by other things that I was trying to sell. So I might revisit that, in the next coming year.
Wow. Well, Dart, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on here, and thank you so much for being able to provide a context that we just simply don't have.
No problem. That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm here for. I'm old. This is the benefit of living through a lot of things and being conscious and aware and having older siblings and older people around me telling me what was going on, because there's no way that an 11 or 12-year-old kid would have been attuned to what was going on if it wasn't for the fact that my older brother is 6 years older than me, and the guys I hung around with were between 16 and 19.
Right.
Wow. Well, do you have anything you'd like to plug to the audience? And again, thank you. Your input has been invaluable here.
Well, again, my book, The Book of Dart, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, different independent. You can find it in Walmart. It's available in a few independent places too. Libris, just use a Libris. You can find every place is there. I have a podcast called Dart Against Humanity. New episodes every Friday. I talk about any and everything. 45 minutes to an hour. And occasionally I write.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you again for coming on, and hope to see you again right here on Rap Rankings.
Hey, it's Mel from Rap Rankings. To hear the full episode this clip comes from and all of the other episodes, check the link in the description, stop by raprankings.com, or search Rap Rankings on your favorite podcast platform. And please consider liking, subscribing, and commenting to help us grow the channel and continue our journey as hip-hop's first and premier extreme podcast.